Hi there, and good evening to you, and good morning wherever you are in the world. And welcome to another Fireside Chat. Eimear Burke here, interviewing a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So just let me know that you're here. Hi, Ellie from Kent. Lovely to see you. So type in your names and let me know where you're from. Hi, Lisa from Washington. You're very, very welcome. Hi, Cavell, I hope, and from Newfoundland. Lovely. And Dean from Bedfordshire. Stephanie from Utah. It's lovely to see the familiar names. Hi, Gunter from the Swiss mountains. That's wonderful. And where are we? Linda. Well done. You made it from Australia. Valentina from Glastonbury. That's lovely. And Jan from Buckinghamshire. Hi, Tara. Miko, Ava from Belgium. Lovely. Hi, Sean. Stefan Makaba. Hi, Susan from Somerset. Lovely. And Susanna from Cornwall. Lovely. Jules, how are you? You're in Wyoming. Lovely. Elliot, how are you? Pauline, Amy. Hi, Susa from Portugal, and Jamie from Ohio. How are you? Hi, Poppy from Stratford-on-Avon. Ben from Canada. Hi, Ronnie from Yorkshire. You're all so welcome. Hi, Mark from Wiltshire. So lovely to be with you again, and let me introduce you to my guest for this evening. So this time we go to the US, and here is Shannon Sloan-Spice. So you're very, very welcome, Shannon.
Thank you, Eimear. It's good to be with you.
So tell our viewers where you are.
I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm about a half a mile away from Lake Michigan.
And so what's your landscape like there?
Well, Wisconsin is beautiful. It's a beautiful state in the U.S. So lots of wild places still, but my heart rests with that great body of water. She has been like a grandmother to me, or a great mother in many ways. So I don't think that I've lived, I think for 5 years I lived about 3 miles away from her, but other than that, about a mile within walking distance. So yeah.
So do you spend a lot? I mean, can you see? You can't see her from your house, can you?
I cannot, no.
Okay.
But about a 10-minute walk away. So I have a big Bouvier de Flanders. We go almost every day.
Say that again.
I have a Bouvier de Flanders, so a big cattle herding dog. So
hey, sorry, I didn't know that was
a very silly Bouvier de Flanders. Yes.
Okay. So I thought when you've got your lake, so what's the landscape around it like?
I mean, it depends on what part of coastline you are. There are parts that have sand dunes, lots of trees usually. In the city, some beaches with wide open spaces. So I think Wisconsin kind of changes a little bit in landscape. We do have mountains in western Wisconsin, but otherwise it's a little bit Midwestern, rolling hills, flatland. Lots of old growth forests, though, for, not being in Europe.
So is that the land of your birth? I mean, is that where
it is actually? Yes. I was born and raised here. I call Milwaukee sort of my Hotel California, like I can check out but never leave. Yeah, because I am really bonded to that lake. Yeah,
it's wonderful to have that. I'm bonded to where I live. I wasn't born here. But it's called to me, and it's lovely to have that connection with the landscape. So we've got mountains of Virginia here. There's lots of people commenting about gorgeous landscape where you are. And what brought you to Druidry?
Oh, this is kind of a magical story involving you, Eimear. My mother died in 2019. Well, I think it actually began a little bit before that. I have a PhD in mythological studies with an emphasis in depth psychology. And when I was writing my dissertation, I wrote it on the Celtic goddess of the land, sovereignty. And so my very dear friend and roommate in my program said, we've got to go to Ireland and do this research. And so I went with no agenda on my first trip, 2013-14. It was over New Year's. And part of that trip was we took a detour with another friend from our program to Wales. She was doing her dissertation on shamanism. And we found ourselves by Snowdonia. There's a druid circle of stones, standing circle of stones in Wales that there's actually several of them up on this mountain, and I would feel embarrassed to try and pronounce it, but it was such a magical response to this very treacherous hike, that took a long time. The winds were blowing crazy. The ocean was insane that year. There was actually water coming into the towns in Wales, and villagers kind of standing on streets where cars were, and seeing the ocean coming right into the village. And so, but the payoff was so incredible, and there were wild ponies up there, and there was these little signs that said Druid Circle, and kind of pointing that way, and so you kind of had to feel your way up this mountain to the space. When I came home 9 months later, every place that I needed to go, it felt like, not every place, but so many places that I needed to go, I happened to have been there. So when I went back into all of my research to write, it was like these unseen hands had pushed me everywhere I needed, to be. And so when my mother died in 2019, as often happens in family dynamics, there's some things that fell apart, and I really needed to heal in a landscape that was deeper than my own ancestral landscape. And so we've decided to come back to Ireland, Sharon and I. And we didn't have much of an agenda, which is, I think, the best way to come to Ireland, and just trust that you'll be taken care of when you go there. But we did have a tour that we planned in Sligo, a walking tour to go see Maeve's Cairn and go to Knocknarrow. And so we did that. And the man who took me on that journey insisted that we go and see Sligo's mythologist, Michael Cork.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's a wood carver as well, right? So we go to see Michael the next day, and of course, you have his carvings. He is the most amazing storyteller, and we were in the shop for 2 hours. Just two mythologists, story nerds, just pouring, just really filling up. And he's like a lexicon of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so he was telling us all of these stories of the landscape of all the places we had been the day before. And he'll take out his maps and show you where things happen and, all kinds of things. And he was, so he had this stone wood carving in the window, and he had two, and Sharon and I both wanted to get one. And I was very polite, I didn't just go into the window and snatch it out. But this man came in and he did that. And so I was like, no, it was the one that I really wanted. He says, yeah, I'm getting that for a present. And he smacks it down. And so here my heart is breaking. And yet at the same time, Michael begins to tell us the story of this sculpture. And she was called the Woman of Many Gifts. And so very much, sovereignty is such a complicated goddess because she's in some ways the goddess of the land, and then also has these beautiful representations of what the sovereignty is, right? So many different women and goddesses are a part of this tradition. And he regaled us between these two sculptures because it was almost like they were a pair. And we got all of this just... it was so beautiful. And at one point he said something like, I have a friend, and he told me the other day, he said, Michael, I'm a secret druid. And he said, well, it's not much of a secret if I've known for 25 years, right? And that his friend was practicing the magic of naming in place, which is just really a very indigenous thing. An indigenous practice, one that I recognize from my own traditions. And and that just was like one of these little, one of many of the little seeds that Michael planted. And actually he was talking about in the stories of mythology, the salmon of wisdom, how there's a salmon for everyone. And so this was our last day in Sligo, and we began to drive away, and I could feel my heart sinking. It was the most magical 3 days. And Sharon kind of looks over at me and she says, what's going on? your heart's broken, isn't it? And I said, oh yes, and all we knew was that the next place we were headed to was Kilkenny. And we had a timeshare there for a week. And of course, again, I hadn't done any research. And she said, well, what are we going to do in Kilkenny? And I said, oh no, what are we going to do? She said, you better fix it. So we arrived that night, and I go to sit down at my computer, and I'm trying to think of what we're going to do. And I just type in Druids in Ireland, and your grove came up. The college came up right away, Kilkenny. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I start reading your profile and seeing your picture and knowing that you were a storyteller. And I've got to get in touch with her. I'm here, and I know that I have to go and see Eimear. And so I, emailed you at like 10 at night. Eimear, I'm here. I don't know why, but I have to come and see you. I don't even remember what I said. My mother just died, grasping for these straws. And you responded a couple of days later. And I was so excited. I was dancing around in the cottage, and you said, come to story time. And so we came and met you at story time, and out at a pub, and had such a beautiful evening. And then we came to your house next day for tea, and we had another beautiful afternoon. And we were standing in your garden at the end of it. And I remember asking you, how did you come to Druidry? And you said, Druidry came to me. It was chasing me, and we went into your temple, and I just began to cry. I'm crying thinking about it right now. It was such a sense of homecoming. It was so beautiful. And so you said, yeah, you were so casual. Maybe if you like it, look into the course and see if you want to do the course. It's really nice, blah, blah, blah. So I came home, and I went to the OBOD website. And at the time, there was this beautiful poem about the salmon of wisdom. Actually, right before we left, we were doing a little gift shopping, and there were 2 salmon of wisdom necklaces at this one shop. There was a salmon of wisdom for both Sharon and I. And when I got home, there was this beautiful poem on the website about the salmon and how she had struggled upstream all of her life. And again, the tears started flowing. I was like, that salmon is me. And so that was it.
Wonderful, and the rest is history. Because I'm always curious about people who come from so many different traditions, and what is it? I know you have Irish ancestry, but you also have Native American Indian ancestry. So, can you just describe I suppose the spiritual influences on you? Because I always find that fascinating.
Yeah.
And the one thing about the Druidry that within OBOD is that it's such a broad palette, because there's so much diversity, and Druidry finds many expressions. I mean, obviously we've common values, but coming from different traditions, there's a space for people to practice their Druidry. But and I know my own one, which is from these lands, and that's fairly straightforward-ish. Okay, I'm saying ish. I'm really interested and curious about other members who don't come from these lands, and how they express it, and how all the other strands inform their Druidry. So,
yeah. Well, I think it started being a very strange, odd duck child, and really finding my center, with trees particularly. Definitely growing up along the shores of Lake Michigan, but I had experienced death, early on. By 8 years old, I lost my grandfather and my father at 15, and so it was always a place that I always went to heal. And when I was 16, I had this urge to find a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to this large powwow. It was called Indian Summer, that we used to have for many, many years along the shores of Lake Michigan. And I went down to the water to pray. And when I came back, there was this man sitting at a picnic table. I walked up to him and I said, "Hello, Pop." And his name was Earl Michigod, and he became my first teacher, Potawatomi Medewan medicine man. And it was very special to me. He actually at the time was doing some ceremony with a Lakota woman, or not Lakota. She was Oneida, but she practiced in a Lakota way. And so when they gave me my name, they gave it to me in both Lakota and Ojibwe. And so my background is, kind of American mutt. I'm European, African American, Native American, as the legend goes, and I think that when you make some of that claim, you have to be very careful, because I was adopted by Earl into this tradition. So I was a ceremony assistant for many years, and that was where I found, I had a Christian family, and I didn't really resonate very much with that. So again, I was very much an odd duck within my own family. But my mother was really very gracious about the fact that she wanted us all to find our own paths. And what she said is that the path for you is the one that least interferes with your relationship to God. And so that really had been, nature for me. And then I went to Peru and did some shamanistic retreats. I have a really close ceremonial circle that I, am with. And so in many ways, I just be very careful and respectful about the fact that I don't have enough native blood to claim ancestry that I know of. And I know that DNA tests are very difficult measuring that as well. So I claim my lineage through my adopted lineage. There are stories, as there are in many families, of having native lineage, but I don't want to claim that without having a tribal enrollment number. I think that tribal enrollment numbers are such a mixed bag, because in some ways
What does that
they
mean?
keep people
Can you explain
out.
what does that mean?
The tribal. So yeah, there's a policy in the U.S. that to claim native blood, that you have to quantify how much blood you have, and that you would have a tribal enrollment number. So my family history was apparently that my grandfather moved away from tribal enrollment numbers because he was worried about what was happening in Europe during the Second World War, and that he just bought a piece of land and decided to live quietly with the land and in those traditions. So we don't ever know really, what the truth is. That is the family legend. So I did grow up on a piece of land in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York that I was very, very, very tied to, very connected to. That was kind of mother to everybody, all the cousins and the aunts and the uncles, and was very close to that land for many years. So, in that way, that was really instilled in me from a very, very young age, having that connection. I had this very interesting experience when I was a little girl, maybe 3.5, where I'd been running barefoot on the land. And I think what happened, because I don't actually remember the incident itself because I was so young, but I was punctured at the bottom of my foot by a twig. My grandfather put some kind of poultice on my foot. And so what would happen is that it would start to tingle every now and then, and this twig would begin to grow out of the top of my foot as it would like purge itself. It was very bizarre. It felt supernatural as a little girl, and I can remember this little guy. He was maybe 2 years old, and he had those really hard-soled baby shoes on.
Yeah.
And he, by accident, stepped on the top of my foot. And I could feel that tingling, and I ran into the bathroom, like the change is coming, and just watched this twig excess itself out of the top of my foot. But I literally thought that a tree was growing from my body.
So it was the poultice drawing out. I mean,
Yeah.
the idea that the body will expel foreign bodies eventually.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I was so tiny, it just seemed like a tree was growing out of my foot.
Oh, that's a better story than a split. Yeah. So did your grandfather, your grandmother, what tradition did she come from?
No, I don't really know. On my mother's side, my grandmother died before I was born, so I don't have much connection in that regard. My grandmother on my father's side was descended from what they called free blacks. So as far as the 1700s, the free blacks were a mixture, white, black, and native, and seemed to not be slaves, actually, from the 1700s.
Okay.
So, but that's my father's side of the family was all colors. My father was very chocolate brown. My grandmother was as light as me. He had a brother who had red hair and freckles. I mean, it was,
Wow.
all over the place. So
You've frozen on me.
Magical woman. She had a huge garden and knew how to plant by the wind, and what goes in the nighttime and what goes in the daytime. And I just remember her sort of as this, talking to her plants and having this incredible garden, and almost being a little frightened of her in some ways. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so you're so that's how my family is too. The melting pot of America. It says the US and Canada both use blood quantum. Here your quantum status on your Indian status card. I'm glad you're discussing all of this. Okay.
Yeah, and the quantum blood has been such a I have such mixed feelings about it, because I feel like it is one of the most racist policies around, that nobody should have to quantify their blood to be, it keeps, initially it was really about helping the native blood disappear off of the land so that the land could be taken. And I think that in the tradition that I was raised, the idea was that if you have one drop of blood, you are native, and it doesn't, and none of that ism and schism kind of matters. That what matters is the heart. And yet you also really need to be very respectful about the fact that I don't speak any language outside of the words that I use to pray, and I don't have a tribal affiliation in that sense, but culturally always wanted to walk in a good way and wanted to have a teacher, and it was the tradition of my heart. Having said that, I think what that there's a heartache too about not being a part of the club, right, in a sense, and one of the things that I think is so tragic is that I just think so much mental illness has to do with us not being connected to the land, not understanding that everybody is indigenous to this world in some way or another, and there are so many lost souls in America that could really use a lineage that grounds them, and we just don't have that. People are so oftentimes very disconnected. So I think there's been kind of a sorrow that I can't fully claim that tradition. But what I love about Druidry is that I don't have to prove anything, and that that I wouldn't step on any toes or offend anybody with my well-intentioned. Right? I mean, we have to understand that sometimes our well-intentioned ways of moving through the world can be harmful for other people, right? And so here I have a sense of safety that I'm not offending anybody in a way, by being a part of this tradition. It's just been very welcoming and grounding.
Absolutely. One thing for me about my own Druidry is because people say, well, people who are not Druids, well, is it all made up? And how can, what do the ancient Druids say and do? And of course, they didn't write anything down. And we only have the accounts of the Roman writers and the Christian monks in Ireland. And, those accounts, thank goodness we have them, although they're heavily biased. I mean, everybody writes with their own bias. There's no one actually objective. But and human lineages are highly flawed. Mm-hmm. And when you get into human lineages, you end up, I don't know if you've ever done Reiki, but I did Reiki, and there are 22 different lineages because Mrs. Takata in Hawaii had 22 different students, and she wouldn't let them take notes. So they all heard it differently, as we do if you can't take notes. And then I remember Pope Benedict having a go at the Church of England, saying it wasn't a real church. It was only an ecclesial communion because it didn't have a lineage going back to St. Peter. And it's like, in any of our family lineages, we don't know. We all know who our father is. So it's when you're basing that, it's very, very flawed. Where for me is my connection. I don't have any lineage ancestors to this land that I know of, but I'm connected to this land from the stones, the earth, the soil, and the River Nore that's out there. And I suppose my wish for people who are not on their so-called native lands is that if that's where you are now, and that maybe you've been there 3 generations, but that's not where your early ancestors were, you still need to connect with that landscape. And all of the hurt people, it's, we'll say in the US or in Canada, where people have been removed from their indigenous lands or put someplace else, and that pain and sorrow, it's still around, I think, connecting with the landscape in a very respectful way. Somebody here, Jamie, I just put this up. Well said. I feel so emotional listening to you, Shannon. All we can do is our best with humility, and at some point, you just have to own your own journey with compassion. She says all her family, all colors. My children are mixed race. Their father was Kanai or K-A-I-N-A-I. All are different colors. Forgive me, Jamie, for not pronouncing that properly. But it's and then here's another one from Tara. How does one learn from the Native Americans in an area? I'm not sure the first steps to connect with the locals. She's upstate New York. I don't know if you have any.
I think upstate New York has the Haudenosaunee tradition, and I would say maybe start by attending a powwow. Once those start happening again, and I think that when I have so much faith that when we're ready, the right teacher comes to us. That's what's really interesting is that, I was a young girl of 16 when I just walked up to Earl and said, "You're the one. I know it." And I'm not saying that in in a there was a calm, like I knew I had to be in that place, there's something in my young body that was getting me there, like, and it's been, he's been a surrogate father to me all of these years. And it was the same when I went, when I go to Ireland. I mean, I feel like Ireland in many ways has claimed me, because it's where I have done so much healing. And, this last time when I went, I also had this sense of like, of trusting. And I think just looking at the signs and listening deeply, I listened deeply to Michael Cork and allowed those little seeds to kind of percolate, and just impulsively followed the clues like little breadcrumbs straight to Eimear. I really did. And felt like as soon as I saw her, that she was one of my people, as well, like, oh, it's you kind of thing again. So
that recognition, I understand that sense of recognition. I felt that when I was in Kenya. I lived in Kenya, I lived in Lesotho, I lived in Tanzania. And I remember when I first, in my early 20s, going to Kenya, I lived in Turkana, in a desert in the north of Kenya, and connecting with women there who didn't have English, and my Turkana was very, very basic. But it was a soul connection through the eyes, just actually looking at each other, and I get you, you get me, even though we come from two different cultures completely. But it was that, and that sense of feeling at home with people. So it's that, and I think OBOD for me has also done that, has offered that connection with people from so many different backgrounds that I would never have encountered if I hadn't joined the order. So
I think a really good clue came from Joseph Campbell to follow your bliss. And I love that he says, follow your bliss and the universe will open windows where there were only walls before. And then Michael Meade, who is, I think, one of the greatest elders of our modern time today, he added a caveat to that. He said, when you follow your bliss, you also follow your blisters. Know what I mean? Because the road gets rocky. Sometimes the obstacle is in the way, and sometimes the obstacle is the way. So you have to, I can't go that way, right? And it shows you the way to go. And I think that when, for me, stories are my bliss. And so I was literally tumbling from storyteller to storyteller in Ireland. But when you follow that and you are in your joy, more of that joy is drawn to you, that continues to fill you up. And, so it was kind of like a step from Michael Quirk to Eimear Burke to OBOD, that it just was, so when I started opening the Guercian, it was all about myths and creativity and connection to the land. It was like, oh, really? So it's really delightful, joyful.
Wonderful. Do you remember, I don't know if that was your first spiritual experience, but maybe the next one after that, spiritual experience that you've had that you remember, a profound one. Can you remember?
I mean, they happen all the time, really. But I think when my grandfather died when I was 8, I was so heartbroken, and yet at the same time I had the sense that he was right here. When I walked to school every morning, he walked with me, and I'd tell my friends, don't sit in my chair, my grandpa's there, and he became like my imaginary friend, until I just had this sense that it was okay, that he was okay. And gradually, a little bit, he kind of faded out. But that also started, I mean, I was 8. And so I began to dialogue with the other world at that time, and try and make sense of things. So I think that definitely made me a very odd child, very sometimes awkward in social situations and way more comfortable in the trees. I mean, I was always riding my bike to the park to a big oak or something, where I could be alone. And I was always, interested in rocks and crystals and tree language and, anything magical was my jam. I just felt like there was more to the world than meets the eye. So, and that, no, I think that's what's so beautiful about going through those processes. Well, no, we're taught to fear death. We're taught to think of it as a bad thing. And yet, even when my father died and I started dreaming of him, it was just as if we were having conversations that continued on past. A relationship continued to grow and deepen as if he had been here. And so, death is such a beautiful teacher. Well, I think we really forget that from the moment we're born, we're walking with her, and she is the great bringer of compassion and empathy, and she shows us that our body doesn't just go through these cycles, but our psyches go through these seasonal cycles and spiral journeys, and again and again and again, sometimes spiraling inward, sometimes spiraling outward, both at the same time. And so I think that made me kind of an odd duck, a weird sister. Yeah.
You'll have lots of people watching you or listening who say, I was odd like that too. So there's a lot of odd ducks. Yeah. Linda is in, I think Linda, she's from Australia, but I think she might be in New Zealand at the moment. I so get that your grandfather was right next to you, and then when the time was right, not so close. Do you think they stayed close for us to help us through the transition time of losing them?
Yes. And also, I think that, we're embodied and we're spirit. And I think if we just look at this from our own sense of going through somebody else's death, that we experience trauma in our body when that happens, and maybe some of you have had that experience where, I mean, I know sometimes when I do yoga, or when I did yoga, even after my mom died recently, that I realized that I'd been kind of hovering up here for a long time in anticipatory grief and all of those things. But then it's like you can kind of feel little bits, like there are these strands that connect you to the body. And so I know in my own body trauma journey that it takes time to unwind. If you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they talk about that there is actually a stage of leaving there's stages of leaving the body, that the spirit does stay close for a while. I think has to go through, on the other side, many of the same things that we go through with that separation of physical connection. I know in the Eastern Orthodox tradition that my stepfather raised me in, they say 40 days it takes for the soul to really, ascend. So I think it's a both and kind of thing. I think it's also really interesting to watch how they're able to come to other members in the family at the same time, that there's mystical experiences happening between family members. So it's quite beautiful. I say, always look to those first, I guess, depending on what culture you come from, those, if it's 4 days, 40 days, always look to those days. Keep in ceremony and ritual and prayer. It helps to move through it in a good way. You know, when my mother died, I was at the funeral home, staging her body, singing her songs, blessing her. I was there at her transition. I was in Sweat Lodge. You know, that every day I was doing something to see her through in a good way. And we took her body to the Adirondack Mountains to bury her by the ancestral land. And that happened like 2 months afterward, when everybody could kind of travel and be at the same place. And so even I stayed in ceremony between the funeral and the burial for about 2 months. And it just helped to take it step by step by step by step. Yeah.
That's lovely. We, I know this is with, I suppose, predominantly Roman Catholic in Ireland. I mean, traditionally, now things have changed, but the tradition here is after the funeral. So you have a wake. Things are changing now. Howard was waked here, actually, in this room. But then we had our own Druidic ceremony. But generally for Irish Catholics is that you have a wake, and then there's the funeral. And then a month later, there's another ceremony called the Month's Mind. So it's that, and people gather. Not everybody came to the funeral the first time, but you're talking about close friends and family come for the Month's Mind. And that's that reminder again. Okay, it's not necessarily 40 days, maybe 30 days, but yeah. So, and then Linda just to come back, because she was asking about this. Yes, I had the body trauma when my mother died, and then more recently my son. I found the sophrology course with Philip has helped me to be fully in my body. Beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Okay, so I'm just thinking. So there's a question I often ask people, when has Druidry supported you? But I imagine, in terms of your mother's passing, it wasn't your Druidry. It was what was there beforehand?
I would say like something happened to me on top of that hill at the Druid Circle in Wales. There was something really just profoundly beautiful. And I was there with two women. There was something about the triad, and being in those stone circles together. And, somewhere in my lineage on my father's side, there's a story of a Druid that came from Ireland named Catherine, in the genealogy somewhere. And I was very lucky that I had sort of a goddess mother, I would call her, that is a Druid that sat on my dissertation committee and is Welsh, and was able to help me move through, what I was writing on sovereignty. So in a way, I've always had it there, but it really seemed like it's time to come home now after she died. And it really supported me in the sense that it gave me freedom and permission to be myself. After your mother dies, you're a totally different kind of human being in a way. You're a different kind of woman, you're a different kind of mother. And it really just encouraged me to not be defined by what anybody else thought of me, but to be my own sovereign self, to really claim my own sovereignty, and say, this is my path and who I am. And of course, I had lived with many of the myths very intimately for years before that. And I've been a mythology professor for 5 years. So they were stories that I carried, I think, because I've always, and before that I was an actor. So stories have always been, I think, a place, especially on stage, you kind of get this lowering of the veils of the worlds between the art world and the character and yourself. And so that can be a very kind of mystical experience as well, when you sort of surrender to the character or the story, full body, full heart. So it wasn't a leap for me. It just really was a coming home. It really was you saying, check this out, maybe. See what you think.
Well, you're very welcome. So, as a mythologist and a storyteller, and a creative being, when have you experienced Imas or Awan?
Well, every time I teach, I think you really have to call on that. It's so funny because I think this kind of goes along with this too. When I told my family I wanted to be an actor, it was like hands in the air, right? Oh my God, how are you gonna make a living doing that? Right. This whole like, here I am, like one of these things is not like the other. And everybody's like, no, you must conform, you must do this, right? And so when I went from acting into my bachelor's degree, I went for writing and philosophy. I was a professional actor. I wanted to know if I was a storyteller. Was I just an actor, or did I have anything to say myself? So I went into this writing degree, and I love philosophy, and then that kind of moved into this MA and PhD in mythological studies and Jungian psychology. And of course, when I declared to my family post-divorce that I was going to go and get a PhD in mythology, people said, mythology is the second least useful degree in the world, just above folklore.
Oh,
now, what are you going to do with that, right? And so I had to declare myself over and over again that this was my calling, that this was my path, and that I was following that blueprint in my heart. And that came with some cost, to be honest, which is hard. But I'll tell you, teaching mythology from a depth psychological point of view during the pandemic, I feel is my answer to, well, what are you going to do with that? Because I've had students, kick drug addictions, heal terrible wounds, move through deaths and these huge transformations of life, divorces, whatever it is, and hold their own power in space. And I think that is like, that's my answer. That's what I'm going to do with it. Who knew that I would be teaching in a pandemic? But it's, I'll get sometimes these midnight messages from students. Oh, Dr. S, everything turned around. I've gone on this journey of discovery. You planted these seeds. I feel so strong. And that is A1 Imbus working all the time. Not through me. I've also seen this happen very often directing spring musicals that I think are wonderful ritual traditions for children to go through the experience of having to produce a play. But it's wonderful when I have students who hit a wall. I can't do it. I don't know what's happening. My life is falling apart. They'll be in my office crying. And I'll say, hang in there, work through it. And you see this journey happen where they completely lose all of their inhibition and come into a sense of self. And that feels like medicine just working through you and tending to spirit. And I've had, I directed, it was wonderful. I directed The Little Prince after my mother died, and that was her favorite story. And wow, was that, I found out I was going to be directing it right after she'd been hospitalized with congestive heart failure, and we had like a 4-month time frame. And so when I got to being in that space, it was such a profound experience to have her on the other side, to have these words I was so familiar with. And one of my little princes had been expelled from school the year before for behavioral issues. And So, so meanwhile, I'm like in between auditions and burying my mother during this production, and I knew that we needed to do yoga to get, I had people that were 55 to 7 in my cast, and my kiddos were running around. So to be able to bring that all together in a shared body experience and yoga practice, this child was still on, he went from not having an ability to focus to coming so into himself, and seeing his mother just cry, and be like, I don't even recognize my son.
Wow.
That is, I think teaching is really the place where I see that the most and feel the most honored. I don't necessarily feel like I have to gobble up my own creative output, but helping others find it is really, I think, one of my gifts.
Wonderful. It's really lovely to hear how, that transformation, how it takes something like a pandemic, how you can just, how it amplifies or highlights the magic of story and mythology. Aaron or Aaron, I don't know how you pronounce your name, Carson, he says, in Thailand, the study of folklore is under the heading of supernatural history. I love that.
I'd love that too. I would say the same is true for Ireland, because the Irish really come out of the mythological tradition of those that came before, the Milesians, right? The Tuatha and the Philbog and all of, right? That there's this lineage in the supernatural history. I think we could all benefit from remembering that.
These are all wonderful stories. So just to remind of lineage, a question I often ask people is, how do you see yourself as an ancestor of the future? Or
yeah, I do a lot of ancestry work. And I think that I have to do that because I carry all of these mixed lineages in my body. And, Jung was able to intuit that we carry ancestral complexes, and science has just backed up that can be for up to 14 generations. And so I know that I have a very complicated ancestral lineage. And I think that one of the things that I need to do for my children is to bring those unconscious forces into light, out of shadow. And that's really difficult work. But I have been doing some family constellation therapy that I think is
very powerful.
The most profound way, because I think it uses that, it uses the imaginal reality to put you in conversation with those ancestors. So having those conversations is really important with my ancestors. But also in terms of becoming an ancestor, I really link all of that to my work with water protecting and with water itself, because, wow, water is the ultimate religion in many ways. She is the ancestor, the oldest living ancestor of us all. And I just find that so beautiful that the water in our bodies was in the bodies of our ancestors, was in the bodies of the dinosaurs, that it cycles through and through and through. And so the best way that I can be an ancestor of the future is to protect the water. Yeah.
And of course, you're an activist, and I just tell our viewers about your involvement in Standing Rock.
Yeah. So, a call went out in 2016 for people to come to Standing Rock and protect the Missouri River from the Dakota Access Pipeline. And there had been Lakota legend about a time when the people would have to fight a great black snake. I want to start this off by saying that one of the stories that I remember that really actually started my journey, it didn't start my journey because I I was an avid reader. From the time I could read, I was reading mythology from all different kinds of cultures, but and fell into the love for the theater by 6th grade, and I was like 12 years old. But Earl told a story one time in a teaching lodge, and it was the story of the 7th generation. He said,
Okay.
in the time of the 7th generation, a rainbow tribe of people will begin to gather to heal the wounds of the world, not through wars or treaties, but through lighting sacred fires and sharing our stories. And I can remember I was in this teepee with him. I heard that and I thought, oh, please let me be at those fires to hear those stories. Oh, I wonder if I'll have any stories that I could even tell. Like, what am I going to do on this time? Right. So I think that really set me on this trajectory of I have to become a storyteller. And it got to such a point. I was, Facebook has many evils, but it also it also brought some beautiful truth to that time, because the media wasn't out there,
Mm-hmm.
and there were just people doing live streams, that were really the truth tellers of what was happening. And I would see these, I'd see I'd see these people, sicking dogs on water protectors, biting them, and bulldozers coming in when they were supposed to be on days of resting, upturning graveyards and sacred lands. And I began to just lose my mind. And I said to my partner, that said, I'm going, I've got to go out there. And so we just kind of said, look, we're going. And generous friends filled a van that we rented with donations, and we drove out there. And it was very scary in some ways, because it was right after Trump was elected that very week. And as we were driving out to Standing Rock, there were all of these acts of racial aggression all around the country, just erupting, women in hijabs being attacked. And it was just, it was horrible. And we thought, what the hell have we really gotten ourselves into? And I can remember that we came over the horizon and I saw the Missouri River for the first time, and my heart, oh my God, so beautiful, and we got to Sacred Stone Camp, which is where LaDonna Bravebold Allard had her land there. And she was the one that had put out that call. And we arrived with our donations, dropped them off at the donation center, parked the van, and then went right into, we went to ceremony. And she told a story about how a medicine man a long time ago had taken, a stone and said, put this stone in this ground, and one day people from around the world are going to come here. And so that was Sacred Stone Camp. And they were, and then across the Missouri was the Chedesakawan Warriors Camp. And then after that, it was, there were yurts that had been sent over, actually, from Siberia, I believe. And so this yurt village was, kind of like a red ribbon consecration and gratitude there. It was November, so we were getting ready to winterize. And then it was like I went into the kitchen to serve. Somebody said, would you help serve dinner? Yes, I'll help serve dinner. And you do all of it. And then it was like, hey, can you do this? Yes, we can. And can Jim, can you help build this schoolhouse? Yes, we can. And you walk past, oh, hey, you guys, can you come help and raise this yurt? Why, yes, we can. And it was this wonderful feeling of, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yeah, you help. Yes, we can answer that call. I think that intrinsically we want to be of use and service. And so it was so beautiful. And Standing Rock in many ways was one of the safest places I have been. Now we were, standing against militarized police in some cases. But the energy that community and sustainability and that this very matriarchal way of everybody's needs are met was so beautiful. You know, the next day, there was a large donation center, but what was so beautiful was that the clothes and the things that we had brought the day before, we saw people wearing them the next day. You know, there was an immediate sense. It's not like when you send off a donation or whatever. There was this immediate gratification of being in service to the water. And I remember there was this woman there, and she was she was blind or legally blind, and her job, everybody was useful, right? Her job was to stir this large cauldron of water every morning and to make coffee for the people going out onto actions. And so and that was a fire that was like one of those eternal fires. It had been lit and it hadn't stopped. And because I'm a storyteller, you know, I started asking people, why'd you come? Why'd you come? Who brought you to Standing Rock? You know, I just had to hear all these stories. And it was kind of then that I realized, with these sacred fires being lit and meeting people from all around the world, I mean, it was incredible. Not only the largest gathering of indigenous tribes, but you know, people from Palestine and Belgium and Colombia. I mean, so many people. And it was this sense, oh my gosh, the sacred fires have been lit. The stories, it's time, you know, it's time. But anyway, she said something. So I said, we were in the kitchen, and I think we were cutting potatoes or something like that. And I said, why did you come? She said, we all came here for the same reason. Because the water in our bodies told us we had to be here. And, you know, that's when I understood so much of who I am, so much of who we all are, that this water is the mother to everyone, bumblebee, human, elephant. You know, she treats us equally in our need for her. And that really changed my life. And then, so we stayed some days in service, and then you had to prepare yourself spiritually to go onto action. And so we were in ceremony as well. And there was this dome where you would go to debrief after actions. And so we went into one of those meetings, and I had the great pleasure of meeting Lisa Fithian in this environment. She is one of the women that started the Occupy Wall Street movement and was in Standing Rock to help really prepare, because the militarized police presence was amping, and people out there had prayers and drums and sort of how do we maintain knowing that this is getting worse in a way. And she said something in that dome. She said, the front line is everywhere. And my heart went right back to Lake Michigan. And I knew that this was the beginning of my work and certainly not the end. And so we went on a beautiful action together, and it was very powerful. And then we came home, and a week later, the water protectors were trapped on that bridge. And that's when I started Water Protectors of Milwaukee, and just said, you know, right, we're gonna keep moving sources. And it was beautiful, because I had asked to rent the basement of the Native American church to hold like a fundraiser, you know, to keep supplies going out to Standing Rock. And one person from the congregation showed up, happened to be leaving for Standing Rock. And so all of those things went right with her. And there was another man who called in and said, you know, is anybody doing anything at the church about Standing Rock? And, you know, there was this really weird woman who did rent our space. And so, you know, he connected. And so there was this group of people that it was like, again, unseen hands. all came together, and we did. We had the beautiful mentorship of Mark Denning and Siobhan Marks, who are two cultural teachers here, who really mentored us. I mean, Siobhan is incredible, and she was a student of a sort of an adopted daughter of Grandma Josephine Mandamin. Josephine Mandamin was a water walker. She walked all around the perimeter of the Great Lakes and really taught women water is women's work, because we carry the life in our own water, in our own bodies. And so I had an opportunity to be mentored by Grandma Jo as well. And it was just such a profound honor to bring awareness. And I know I continue to have a Facebook page, Water Protectors of Milwaukee, and just really support that work and do what I can. I've noticed recently that you have a fight in Ireland with the Bone River there happening, that there's I think a threat of a pipeline trying to go under the water there, which just seems insane. But there was an elder that actually appeared. We were still having meetings with water protectors, and it was sort of like after Standing Rock ended, things began to fizzle out. Of course, again, the front line is everywhere, and so there are water fights all around the world. But this man appeared out of nowhere, and he came, I think, to do some kind of ceremonial blessing. His name was Chigoni, and he showed up and he said, when they put those sacred fires out at Standing Rock, those embers were lit in our hearts, and from there they can never be extinguished. So
that is so important and so powerful. So I just wanted. Ellie says that she remembered watching the live stream on Facebook and donating tents and sleeping bags. And she said, on the other side of the world, but my heart was with all of you. Well done for you for being there. And actually, I'm feeling quite emotional now. OBOD member Deirdre Wadding, who's here in Ireland, and she's a warrior. She organized a ritual at Ishnok. I don't know if you've been to Ishnok in Ireland. That is like the Umphalis of Ireland.
Okay.
And it's where the Bealtaine fires were lit. And Pat, I'm just going to come to this. Pat Booker says, yes, the wastewater pipeline they want to put into the Boyne, but also the threat of gas caverns they want to put into Larne Harbour, that's up near her. The issue of the dredging on Lough Neagh, that's another Northern Irish one. The risk of cyanide poisoning in the runoff on the Sperrins. Our water is threatened in so many ways. Pat, thank you for highlighting that. Yeah. Absolutely appalling. But to get back to Ishnok, so Deirdre organised through Facebook. She was having a ritual in solidarity for those at Standing Rock. And it was an absolutely amazing day. She was expecting about 30 people, but 300 people turned up.
Yeah.
Really, really, really powerful ceremony. And there happened to be a film company filming her, and I think they filmed the ritual and I think sent it to Standing Rock. And the power of ritual, because someone says, Holly Munford from USA, water ritual is great. That the power of ritual can never be, I think, underestimated. That you may not be able to march wherever you are. You may not be at that front line there, but you can have one here. And like that ember being in your heart, that you can send out healing or positive energy or whatever it is, from your own heart, in your own space, in your own ritual. So
I think Standing Rock was a cosmic event, to be honest, because you could feel all of that prayer there. You could feel all of that global support. And even, when we started Water Protectors of Milwaukee, same thing, Eimear, you thought maybe 10 people would show up. All of a sudden you had 100 people marching, people wanted to help. people wanted to be a part of it, and they were a part of it. And I was very excited to see, that waterways in New Zealand and in India, rivers that were the seed of creation of the people, were considered goddesses in some way, were beginning to be protected, and we're actually granted personhood and sovereignty. It's really the next step in what we need to accomplish. And I'm just blessing the work of Polly Higgins and all that she did to, bring a predecessor of ecocide to try some of these, big polluters and hold them accountable. Because the next thing we really need to do is to grant personhood to all waterways. It just doesn't line up to me. It is the seat of ignorance to mess with your water. And there's line 5, trying to go under the Mississippi up in Minnesota, and Winona Leduc is championing. I mean, it boggles the mind that we could even take the chance with the source of with source itself. I mean, water isn't just it's not a resource, it is source. So
it is. I remember watching a video of the then CEO of Nestle. He had me gobsmacked, and he said, "It's not a human right, water. It is a resource to be exploited, and that we're all not working hard enough."
Well, and of course, Nestle, as they're getting ready to lay pipe in the Missouri, was there scooping up gallons of water. I mean, it's atrocious behavior. It's egregious, and it does. We do need to make a shift toward sustainability long ago. So I hope that we will. And to go back to that comment about ritual, you can take a glass of water, and you can talk into it, and you can pour it into the earth, and that is, water finds its way. I think it's like, one drop of water is connected to the whole macro. So yes.
Because sometimes we can maybe feel we're too small, or fall into a place of powerlessness or helplessness. But what is it? Anita Roddick said this to she who she built the body shop, that business. She said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, you've never been in bed with a mosquito.
Yeah, right. So I think that's what we're all at this time called to do, and I think that's that ember that was ignited in people's hearts all around the world. Again, Michael Meade teaches about the genius myth. We've moved past this idea of a hero's journey where one makes the journey on behalf of the collective. The idea is that we all have an ember of greatness that has been planted inside of us. And, right now it's all hands on deck. All geniuses come forward, and what's so beautiful in the diversity of that is that I can focus on water. I know somebody else is going to be focusing on Black Lives Matter. I know somebody else is going to be focused on cancer research. That you come to it with your passion and your bliss for the work, and it makes a difference. Yeah.
What would you say?
It's really quite profound and beautiful.
You've achieved a lot. What would you say you're most proud of?
My children, of course. I am just in awe of their resiliency, especially right now in pandemic time. I am the proud mother of a trans son who came out when he was in middle school. And, I have a beautiful daughter just getting ready to graduate high school. For myself personally, because I can't really claim their achievement as my own, they're their own people, but I think that I didn't die from heartbreak several times in my life. That I found a way to I think kind of find my way from mud to lotus, through some pretty severe processes of divorce, death, and a lot of naysaying about, who do you think you are, storyteller, that you should be happy, that you should have a job that you enjoy going to, right? That there was all this naysayer energy. I think any of us that survive the overculture, which I think is there to destroy us and tear us down, we get a pass. So I think, not becoming a cruel person, when I look at the cruelty that I, survived in some instances, and also I think more recently, and especially doing this ancestral and shadow work, having the courage to do that work and having the courage to face my monster, with love and compassion, and to be able to ask forgiveness, for instance, from my children for not knowing that I was, I think I very easily project Earth Mother for many people without also understanding that Earth Mother and Death Mother are the same. And then I definitely have Death Mother there too, right? And so, that my persona may be Earth Mother, but I am also Death Mother, and certainly have had those experiences where my own shadow has come forward in a way that I wasn't even conscious of, especially in parenting. And to be able, to have, to be able to face my children and say, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. And now I'm trying to do better by you. That it takes tremendous amount of courage.
I think facing that and being able to acknowledge your wrongdoing to your children and to apologize, I think is hugely freeing, not only for yourself, but also for them. I think it's really important.
Charlie, I feel like I've had to chase a ghost after, my mom left a lot of secrets and lies behind. And I feel like I've been chasing ghosts since she died. And Charlie said to me one day after we had a really tough discussion.
Who's Charlie?
Charlie's my son.
Okay.
He said to me, Mommy, I'm so glad I didn't have to chase ghosts, that you're willing to talk to me, and I thought, oh my gosh, how many of us do that? How many of us are not having those really deeply authentic conversations that we need to have? I mean, it's like we're almost conditioned into superficiality. So to be able to, we just had this last night where we just had a family talking circle to really get stuff off of our chest. Trying to move out of triangulation in communication is a huge investment, so I think just continuing to show up to do the work is my greatest accomplishment, and the thing about doing the work is that it's not like you do the work. I was talking with a really good friend of mine last night. You do the work and you don't stop doing the work. More work shows up to do. And it's like once you have that pinprick, it becomes a tidal wave, So just moving through all of those waves and holding firm and staying grounded and being compassionate with myself and forgiving with myself. Yeah.
Do you have many regrets?
Of course. 100,000 regrets. And also no regrets at all. It's one of those both and things. I think when you begin to walk in this way, I go back to Michael Meade, you're able to bless the bliss and blisters. I can see the places where the obstacle, for me, the obstacle is the way. Unfortunately, I've always taken the hard road. And so rather than bemoaning that, though, I choose to bless it. And I know that I have a saying that everything is in perfect order, even when it's chaotic in my life. And I wouldn't have, I don't know if it's such a strange thing. Are we fated or are we free? There's points of our lives where I think that we're in palm reading. I found out that the lines in your hand can actually change, that we actually can change our fate, and it's written right there, which is really very interesting. But there's also places where I think that we're destined. And I think if you're not doing any kind of ancestral work, that you were bound to repeat the patterns of your ancestors. And that is really kind of a mind-blowing thing, that maybe I wasn't walking my own road, but I was walking in the exact same footsteps, Yeah.
I wonder this sense of that we repeat the pathways of our ancestors until, in our own lives, we repeat patterns until we realize, actually, this pattern isn't working. We need to change it.
Yeah.
And I wonder, do we repeat those patterns until we actually turn around and look back at our ancestors and look at what needs to be done?
I believe ancestral work is where it's at. Yeah.
And that is really painful work, because you have to look to, the pain of ancestry, but also the guilt of ancestry, and the good stuff and the bad stuff, and we all have it, no matter what our lineage is.
Yeah,
both of it is there, rather than I come from an only victimized lineage, and poor me, I'm Irish, I come from a colonial background, I've really, really suffered, blah 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 blah. But there's a colonialist in all of us, there's a terrorist in all of us,
yeah,
aggressor in all of us, and that sneaks out every now and again when you're not watching.
That's right.
And I we often see people playing the victim card all the time, or too much of it, rather than actually, look, we've all been victims in one way or another, but we are also can also be an oppressor as well. And once we can recognize it, I think there's a lot of work that's done by having done that recognition.
Accountability is really powerful and painful. Healing is painful.
Yes.
I mean, let's just call it what it is. It's painful work. And I think that's why people avoid it, to be honest. Because, like I said, you open up that can of worms and wow, but at some point too, I started to realize, and this was kind of liberating, that some of the anxiety that I've been plagued with all of my life was almost like the ancestors weighing down on me. And in this family constellation work, especially turning to the unseen, unheard women in my ancestral lines, wow. And to be able to say, I see you, I didn't know you're there, I know you're there now. I can't care. I honor your story, but I can't live your story. So in some ways, kind of like back off and let me figure out, let me be in my own skin for a little bit and figure out this part of the journey in a very respectful way, but also I think that's that request for sovereignty. Let me have let me find my way with right relationship as best as I can without the weight of your unlived dreams.
Absolutely. Linda says, I love my ancestry work. It illuminates so much of my life. The healing comes from the realization that we are one and the same entity, just living in a different time. Yeah. Are you saying something different to that? When we're one and the same entity, just living in a different time. So I think maybe what Joan is saying, that if you can feel now the pain, the family pain in your life, you're actually healing it backwards.
Yes.
And you were saying that sometimes you find there's too much pressure from the past, but that you want to do it in your time so that you can actually do it rather than it being a force that's weighing you down. I don't know if I'm making sense.
I mean, we're complicated. We're so complicated in our psyches and our bodies. And I think that the body is one of the places where we really need to begin with, because so many of us from our traumatic experiences are dislocated. You know, it's like we're big floating heads, right? But it's once you get into the body stories and you start that body work, you know that you're carrying more than your own load. And it's so powerful to allow your body to tell those stories that sometimes you hold on to for years and years and years and years, and you don't even know that it's been stored there. And I think going back to the idea of water as our oldest living ancestor, you know, that's why it's so important for me to honor the water, because I think water holds memory. You know, certainly the work of Dr. Matsuro Emoto suggests that, and one of the things that I love about his work is the way in which water is co-creative with the words that we speak. I think that's such a ancient druidic concept, right? You know, that these words that we speak are power spells, whatever you want to call them. Satires, they used to be called, but they are, that we have to be careful about how we speak, and we have to be careful about how we speak about ourselves in our resonant water bodies, because this is how we manifest as dis-ease, you know. And so knowing that we can't just spiritually bypass and be kind to others, we really have to cultivate kindness to ourselves and gentleness with ourselves. And sometimes that's very difficult when we don't come from loving traditions, or, you know, we have critical parents, or what, you know, or even parents that want us to fulfill their dreams for our lives instead of finding our own ways. So yeah, going back to that water work becomes very essential.
Okay, you've achieved a lot. What's the most reckless thing you've done?
Oh, I think getting a PhD in mythology.
Why was it reckless? It seems like a very setting out was. I'm starting to think you're my twin. I never knew I had. That's from Ellie Tallet. It's wonderful, Ellie.
The friends we haven't met yet. Yeah, you know, again, this, I mean, because there was an investment, you know, America, we pay through the nose for PhDs, and then, you know, there's all of this adjuncting culture, so you don't actually, you know, full professorship is like the unicorn we all wish we were, or whatever. But you know, so I think the investment to you know, to that, and that question, what are you going to do with a myth degree? You know, you're a single mother, how can you possibly and, you know, continuing to find my love and joy for stories, despite what salary I make or don't make, or what benefits I have or I don't have, but finding the joy and staying close to my passion, and just trusting that even if it doesn't look like how I want it to look like now, that it will be okay. Certainly made, you know, had some more reckless behavior maybe as a young person, you know, but I think as an adult, as a mother, that was the reckless one. Yeah.
And what are you most grateful for?
Paradox of life in some ways, being able to hold the space between the ecstasy and suffering that we all experience, being able to witness and hold space for others going through those transitions. Of course, my children, my partner, my friends. But I think connection to spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I think I even saying I'm grateful for the deaths in my life. Walking with death is such a profound teacher of empathy and compassion.
Sorry, death has taught you empathy, compassion, or it's one of
Yeah,
the
I
taught
think it
you?
does, doesn't it? It breaks you open like nothing else, right? So, in many ways, I think one of the greatest gifts my mother gave me was her death. So much became, fell away that needed to fall away and has
Yeah.
also emerged. And so I think just cultivating this mythopsychological lens that helps me move through it with grace. And a gratitude practice of itself, I think, is the most powerful magic that we can practice, because there's no room for any other emotion in the brain. I mean, the Buddhist monks have done studies on gratitude practices. When you are in a gratitude practice, you are completely in the present. So when you're there, you're not, ruminating about the past. You're not, anxious about the future. We are fully present in the moment. And when we're present, we are the gift. And that when I can be present, I am so grateful. Yeah. Yeah. So
And given the current, world situation, how important it is to have gratitude, and it's challenging, to be in this moment. But that is the only thing we can do. Otherwise, we're fighting against, I don't know, fighting against the world. That
huge existential ennui that I think gratitude is the answer for. And I find too that a walking gratitude practice when I am really super anxious helps, so it's thank you each step, the dog on my way, running to the light. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. If I don't even know what to say, if I just say thank you for my healing. But usually it's thank you, tree, thank you, bird, thank you, stars, thank you, moon. And I will exhaust myself until I literally cannot think of anything else to say. And I have been in places where I lost my job, for instance. I didn't know where my next paycheck was coming. I mean, as an artist, you often are in this space. And I find if I step into a gratitude practice, if I don't buy into the scarcity of the moment, if I give, $5 of my last $10 away, like magic, within 10 minutes to 24 hours. Hey, how would you like to do this job? Hey, how would you like this opportunity? I mean, it moves the abundance into our lives, and there's always so many things to be grateful.
Here's a question from Sean Hinchcliffe that wasn't on my list. What do you find most difficult, and who is your role model?
Well, it's a tough one because the things that you have the most difficulty with, sometimes they're part of your own shadow. So, that's so easily recognizable in other people. I've had so many hardships. Secrets and lies are difficult. Half truths are difficult. I think just really any isms and schisms, that I'm sick of misogyny. I'm sick of ecocide. I'm sick of racism. I'm sick of any ideology that that elevates one over the other. Meanness in the world, a lack of manners. Littering makes me crazy, So all of those are kind of external things. For myself, the most difficult task has been, I think, and I think maybe this is the same for many of us, is trying to learn how to deal with your own trauma without keeping yourself in victimhood story. You know, that is a challenge, because you do really have to hold the depths of your grief. And you
Yeah.
really do have to give that voice. It's so much a part of your healing. But you just don't want to, again, call more in by your story being broken, your story being only about brokenness, you know. And so I think healing the narrative is really powerful. And as far as role models, I have so many role models. Are these personal role models, or like characters in the world?
Well, it could be an influential person from history, a person in your life you admire, somebody, in your family, or it could be beyond that, I imagine.
Well, my son is one of my heroes. He came out as a trans kid when he was 11,
Wow.
and yeah, I mean that was incredible. I love, gosh, it's so hard to just say one. I love the work of Winona Leduc. I think she's so brilliant, and
Explain who she is.
Winona Leduc has been a Native American activist for many years, and she is leading the Line 5 fight right now in Minnesota, and really a Harvard educated woman who talks about the fact that we have this like Wendigo economics. Wendigo is sort of this monster in Anishinaabe culture that just is hungry and eats and devours, right? And that we have this sort of Wendigo economics right now. And really, I think she's going to be one of the voices leading us into sustainability. Then Donna Shiva, wow, she took on Monsanto, kicked them out of India, powerful. So many wonderful, strong women. Trying to think of. I have so many wonderful friends, that I am so impressed with their courage and resiliency. I have a very dear friend who's just gone through and, still is battling a sarcoma diagnosis, and has been able to teach in such a beautiful way how community can come together around that, how healing is, how connected between the ones that you love. So in his own healing journey, others along praying for him are also healing in our lives. That there's this beautiful interconnectedness that has shown me so much courage and community, and how to look at something like that and to say, what are you here to teach me? What do I need to know? How do I move forward in a good way? To have that kind of dialogue, and instead of being fear-based, being based in love. It's just been so profound and powerful. I'm really inspired and blessed. Yeah.
Just to come back to you, the work you've done yourself, and not staying stuck in your victimhood. And I think that is so important, that so many of us have experienced pain to a greater or lesser extent. And I know in my work as a psychologist, I like to take a strengths-based approach. That when you look to, if we look only to the deficits and the pain, the sorrow, and it's not about ignoring them, it's engaging with them and feeling the pain and the loss. But it's not from that story that you will find strength. It's about your own strength. You will find resilience. There's always some, even if it's the thinnest thread of resilience that you can build on, and it's from your strengths that you will grow. So no matter what terrible story somebody has, what is it that has them here? If you have children who only attend school twice a week, they come from a whatever difficult background. The question is not why are they not coming to school those 3 days? It's like, why are they coming on the 2 days? Let's find out there. There's something there. And it's to find that, and from building your own strengths, the smallest little things. I mean, when I see people, because my experience is Africa, and I worked when I first went to Africa, I was in Kenya in the early 80s, and they'd just come out of a famine. And I'm looking at the resources and the resilience of people, who have lost family members, lost their animals, lost so much. And that ability just to, what is it that keeps them going?
Yeah.
And, and I even look at my own resilience, how I've managed my own grief. And like I was saying to you earlier, I wouldn't be feeling this grief. This is the grief I pay is for the love I've had. When I've had so much, and the grief is the price I pay, and I'm glad to pay it because of what I've had. So it's that holding both that pain and joy at the same time. And I remember, in these last 6 years since Howard passed, that, or particularly when in the first few years, where I am feeling so much grief, but I could never say I was unhappy.
Yeah.
I was sad, but I was not unhappy. I could still think I have good friends. I have my kids. I have other family members. I have a spiritual practice. I have an order. I have so much going on. I have also this pain, and being able to hold those rather than poor me, which is a place you can go to when you're feeling very, very low. So
I think we tend to look at ourselves as either or, right? But we're really both and.
We're both and, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And remembering that can be so helpful. I know when my mother died, I mean, I was so crushed, and yet I would have these, waves of grief followed by waves of gratitude. And I think that literally all of that gratitude pouring in, it sustains and elevates you. This is the work of alchemy. We're supposed to transmute, the lotus from the mud. And we all know what that mud feels like. And that is the work. That is the work. So if we're avoiding the work, we're not living an authentic life in that sense.
Absolutely. So maybe you've mentioned it already, but if there's anything else you'd like to add, one concern you have, I mean, you've mentioned many, but one concern you have about the modern world, one particular one.
Right now, I think as an educator, I have a concern that so many people are just traumatized by their education, and I feel like there is that education needs to be decolonized. It needs to be longer authoritarian, punitive, because we're raising bullies. The same kind of bullying on the playground happens in the workplace, and what we're not teaching are these skills about self-regulation, how to work with your trauma, how everybody's traumatized right now in this pandemic. How are we going to move that out of our bodies? How are we building community? I'm concerned about this sort of level of superficiality that people feel comfortable living in, as opposed to being authentic and living in that paradox, maybe even a little bit more. There's just this sort of meanness or selfishness that is destroying us. I'm not worried about the planet. But I am, I am worried about us. And even there, though, I have hope, that if we disappear, the mycelium kingdom will rise up and take over. So it's not the end; it's just the end of this era or whatever. But that we need to bring kindness, and we need to teach how to self-regulate, how to down-regulate the nervous system so that healing can happen. We really do need to teach about how to care for your body, and be in dialogue. And I think these are the things, again, that we're so disconnected from. I have so many young women, young girls who have, they can't see their own beauty. All they can see is the criticism, right? It's this kind of overculturing messaging that we're not enough, we're not enough. It has to stop. And as educators, we're responsible for that.
I see Aaron, I'm concerned about Instagram face. I mean, that is one thing that gets me is the level of self-reference. I make a statement about me and someone is offended by it, that somehow something about me offends them, that this is all about me and my inability to, like you say, self-regulate, that I'm wounded and I'm triggered by so many things.
Well, and that triggering, can actually be ancestral complexes. I mean, this is why you have to do this kind of work. When you're triggered and you don't know why, you have to go and look at the shadow. You have to go and face whatever is in that unconscious. And I think that for the most part, there's a great majority of people living in unconsciousness. And so then, then we move into these projections and we vilify the other without realizing, it's not about out there. It's really about what's going on in here. If we could calm the turning in our own psyches and hearts and souls and bodies, then we could really fix some things. And it doesn't take a lot. It's just like how we saw in the first lockdown, how the earth began to just repair herself so quickly. We just need a little time and space and saying, no, this is what we need to focus on. We're not in a place we're not an industrialist society anymore. What we really need to do is move into sort of a sustainability as opposed to productivity, sustainability model. And that's the task right now.
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember that we don't have to agree to be kind. And I think that's kindness is not a declaration of agreement. And disagreement is not a declaration of the opposite either. I think you're so right that there needs to be that space for different viewpoints, and not always assuming that the other is the enemy. Yeah. Okay, Ash Lynn, I got this is a big question. Do you think some of the ancestral stuff has to do with the politics that are going on right now? Either they're healed ancestors, but I've seen a lot of people hold on to ancestral things, and I'm wondering if it's like a pattern that's going on in their life that they're unconscious with.
I would say a lot of these things are patterns. In fact, there's some really interesting research right now about, I just heard something on National Public Radio about honor culture versus dignity culture, and how this sort of Scots-Irish honor culture for men in particular can be very have a certain kind of in an honor culture versus a dignity culture, there's just more violence. I think some of the research is saying, like in honor cultures, men over 75 are really at risk for death by suicide, for instance, because honor culture is based on sort of usefulness, whereas dignity culture would suggest that everybody has a place on the land, right? Whereas honor culture, you got to kind of fight for it and defend it because nobody's going to help you. And that this is something that really comes from the Scots-Irish tradition, and in America, at least, we can see very differences in large differences in culture between like northern states or northeastern states and western states and southern states that are dignity versus honor culture. So yes, I think that politics, culture, film, all of those things are supported by these unconscious patterns that we inherit. Yeah.
Okay, what gives you hope?
Myths.
Go on.
Myths give me hope because myths speak to the idea that we are both at the end of the world and at the beginning of the new one. That again, it's happening in paradox. It's not just like, and that in some ways we have been through this all before, again and again. Every culture has a story of the Great Flood. Every culture has a story of I love that this is a sort of Celtic idea that the 3 stages of life are death, incubation, and rebirth. So myths really give me hope for the world that, because I understand so much that we move in cycles and spirals, that things fall away and new things arise, just like winter turns to spring. So I have a lot of hope from those stories and from the gods and goddesses and the heroes and sheroes before us that tell us just to hang in there, just to move through it and not fear going into the cauldron of rebirth, but to face it with courage and intention, however that looks.
I remember hearing the story about the room of the 1,000 fears. This is the bit I remember, that I don't know if it's in Tibet, but the monks go through every 100 years, they get a chance to go through the room of the 1,000 fears to gain enlightenment. And they're told 2 things. Remember, all those fears are in your head and keep walking. And those who remember those 2 things come out the other end. The others have to come back and wait another 100 years. So it's really interesting about fear that it stops us, and they are only in our heads. I think we're born with 2 fears, the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. The rest are learned. And when I think of the things that I've been afraid of in the past, and I still can get them, but it's like, why was I afraid of that? And then the thing is, and what stood to me, and I can see it in my own family, some of us do, is you keep moving, just push through it, don't give up, and that has I suppose sustained me in a very important way.
I love that, Eimear.
JJ Howard wants to say, I want to offer and honor respect for the beauty shining through your spirit, Shannon. I experience courage, values, and wisdom emanating from your very way of being, and give gratitude for your presence both here and in the world. And then this is one from Ellie. Now, Ellie was one of my guests earlier.
Okay.
One of my first guests. Now I can hero worship you, Shannon, she says.
Oh, and also you, all of you. I can't tell you how much having this community and the gift of this pandemic in a way to reach beyond our usual way of doing things has just been so uplifting. I'm sure you all had the same experience that I did, that Eimear's induction in the interior world first was so powerful because we were linked in a way all around the globe that, again, like Standing Rock, our hearts were all in that inner world first. And it was just so powerful, and I feel deeply feminine and appropriate for our chosen high chief. and first woman in this role in modern times to be inducted in that way, in the way that we've been able to foster community, because many of us are practicing solitary around the world, but these moments really help us build community. And look at how Eimear has lit the sacred fire, and it's even called Fireside Chat, and all of these stories come forward in these, and this is the healing. These are these moments where I say, there's another sacred fire. Look at these stories. This is how the world is actually healing. It's not, it isn't through the wars and treaties. It's through all of us putting our stories side by side. It's really beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. So what will you not compromise on? I like these easy questions.
Yeah. I will not tolerate unkindness and abuse. I won't argue with people that are committed to misunderstanding me. Life is so short. And as I get older, I just have less tolerance for engaging in those kinds of battles. I just really want to move forward in a good way, and do my work. So yeah. There's a bumper sticker that I love, which is "Mean people suck," and I think that's really, I just don't tolerate it, and people have a propensity towards meanness, and so I have a very strong mama bear quality. I'm not, like I said, I can project Earth Mother, but please don't call in Death Mother, right? Because she will come out and ride, and it'll be fierce and furious, and people, well, their heads will spin, because I'll like just absolutely not cut it off. So
there's a color in all of us. Yes.
It's that question between pacifism and activism, right? How much do you? Yeah, I see peacekeeping as a verb, as an action, as something that you participate in. It's not like a rest from action, but it is the action itself. So.
Yeah. So I mean. Okay, so my final question, and this is usually it's the last question I ask people, is what is your favorite festival of the Wheel of the Year?
Hard to say. I think it can shift. I think in general, Samhain has been my favorite holiday of all time, because of that thinning of the veils between worlds in some ways, and because of the ancestor work that I'm so dedicated to doing. But this past winter solstice was so beautiful and powerful, with the the great conjunction, and I love the idea of the return to light, from that terrible place of darkness. That one pinprick of light, baby step toward the light, is so powerful and beautiful. And I know that there's there's good things in all of them, but I would say I'd say those darker ones mean a lot to me.
Funny, because I think Samhain might be the favorite. Most of my guests have said Samhain is their favorite. I find it's the one I'm in now.
Yeah, right.
I kind of go, I love it. Oh, yeah, I love this one, and then once I'm in, it's like, oh yes, I remember, and how much I enjoy it, and the thing is, I can follow easily the Wheel of the Year, because the seasons are kind of more or less, or the landscape is in keeping with the Wheel of the Year. What's it like where you are?
At which one?
at any of them. So
right
I mean,
now, or
yeah. So it's
so. Yeah, I mean, in October, November, we're just at the end of all of autumn. So it's often autumn is my favorite season. It's so beautiful, colorful, and it teaches me that there's a beauty in letting go. And I love that. That tree releases that leaf, and you pick up that, you say, oh my, this is so beautiful. It's beautiful to let go. So winter solstice, we're freezing cold. We're like polar vortex, freezing cold land of, we had snowbanks taller than me in February,
wow.
which is so strange, but so yeah, and February this year was when winter really came. Normally it'll come in November or December, but we had a month of winter all of February. We were pummeled and pummeled and pummeled. So not very much beginnings of spring then. We were really under snow. But now things are budding out, and the first flowers, daffodils are out. So it's the crocuses, the red robins are back. So
Wonderful. We had Easter last weekend, and the first few days were lovely, absolutely beautiful. And then there was hail 2 days ago, hailstones. So and somebody says here, Sharon, it's trying to snow today. I don't know where you are, but anyway,
I haven't, I won't be able to clear like my flower beds for a while. You just have to give those little insects and bees some time, because where we are, we've got like the fickle finger of weather fate. And so, yeah, we fluctuate. Yesterday it was almost 80 degrees. Today it's 50 and raining, so a 35-degree fluctuation or whatever. So, yeah.
These are strange times. Shannon, it has been an absolute joy talking to you. And I know from the comments of our viewers, they've been really, really taken with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eimear. I had such a wonderful time connecting with you tonight.
Coming all the way from Michigan to be here.
I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Thank you. So I'm just going to ask you to stay where you are, and I'm just going to say goodbye to people. So,
okay.
So thank you all so much. And I'm going to read your comments. I'm sorry I didn't get to answer or comment on all of them because there were so many. And it's just lovely to have you join us and to join in the conversation and to ask questions, etc. And it's just such a joy to have you here and to host these fireside chats with these amazing guests that I have. I feel so blessed to be able to have them by my fireside. So I look forward to seeing you all next week for another fireside chat. In the meantime, take care and slán go fóill. Bye-bye.